August 2nd, 216 BC. The sun rose over the plains of southern Italy, illuminating what would become the largest graveyard the ancient world had ever seen. On this single day, more Roman soldiers would die than Americans lost in the entire Vietnam War. More men would fall than in any single day of World War I. The Roman Republic, master of the Mediterranean, ruler of 1,000,000 souls, was about to learn a lesson written in the blood of 70,000 of its finest warriors. They were about to face Hannibal Barca, and nothing in their experience had prepared them for what was coming. To understand the magnitude of this catastrophe, we must first understand who these Romans were. They were not the decadent Romans of the late Empire, grown soft on wine and spectacle. These were the Romans of the Republic, hard men forged in constant warfare. Every male citizen served in the legions. By age 30, a Roman had likely survived a dozen campaigns. They had conquered the Italian peninsula tribe by tribe, city by city, learning to fight in the mountains, the forests, the swamps. They had defeated the Greeks with their sophisticated phalanxes, the Gauls with their terrifying charges, the Samnites in their mountain fortresses. They had never lost a war. Not once, not ever. Their military system was revolutionary. While other armies relied on aristocratic warriors or citizen militias, Rome had created something entirely new, a professional military machine where discipline mattered more than individual heroism. The legion was not a mob of warriors, but an organism. Each man knew his place, his role, his duty. They fought in formations so tight that their shields overlapped, creating a wall of wood and iron that could grind through any enemy. When one man fell, another stepped forward instantly. No gaps, no hesitation, no mercy. The Roman war machine didn't just defeat enemies, it devoured them, processed them, erased them from existence. And in 216 BC, Rome had assembled the largest army in its history, 87,000 men, 8 full legions plus auxiliaries, all marching south with one purpose: to crush Hannibal Barca, once and for all. But who was this Hannibal that Rome feared enough to mobilize such overwhelming force? He was not some barbarian chieftain, not some tribal warlord drunk on temporary victories. Hannibal Barca was a weapon forged by hatred and tempered by genius. His father, Hannibal Barca, had fought Rome in the First Punic War and lost. But before he died, Hamilcar took his 9-year-old son to the Temple of Baal in Carthage. There, in front of the sacred flames, he made young Hannibal swear an oath on the blood of sacrificed animals. "I swear eternal hatred toward Rome. I will never be Rome's friend. I will destroy Rome or die trying." That oath became the organizing principle of Hannibal's existence. Every decision, every strategy, every risk, all served that single burning purpose. By 218 BC, Hannibal had become the commander of Carthaginian forces in Iberia, modern-day Spain. He was 29 years old, but he had been at war since childhood. His soldiers worshipped him. He ate what they ate, slept where they slept, fought where they fought. He could quote Homer and Euripides in Greek, discuss philosophy with scholars, then personally lead a cavalry charge that would break an enemy's spine. When Rome declared war, the Second Punic War, most generals would have waited for the Roman legions to cross the Mediterranean to Africa. Hannibal did the unthinkable. He decided to invade Italy itself, to bring the war to Rome's doorstep. But between Spain and Italy stood the Alps, the greatest mountain range in Europe, considered impassable by any army. Hannibal looked at the Alps and saw not an obstacle, but an opportunity.
In the autumn of 218 BC, Hannibal began one of the most audacious military campaigns in history. He marched 50,000 infantry, 9,000 cavalry, and 37 war elephants. Yes, African elephants, from Spain through southern Gaul and into the Alps. The mountain tribes attacked constantly, rolling boulders down on the army, ambushing supply columns. The cold was merciless. Men froze to death from their sleep. Horses slipped on ice and plunged thousands of feet to their deaths. The elephants, creatures of African heat, suffered terribly in the snow. Hannibal himself lost the sight in one eye to infection during the crossing. When his engineers told him a massive boulder blocked the only pass through the mountains, Hannibal ordered them to heat it with fire until it was red hot, then pour vinegar on it. The thermal shock shattered the rock. They carved a new path through solid stone. After 15 days in hell, Hannibal emerged into northern Italy with barely half his original force. He had lost 20,000 men and most of his elephants. The Romans, hearing of his arrival, laughed. He had destroyed his own army just getting to Italy. Now he faced the full might of Rome with exhausted, freezing, starving soldiers. It should have been a quick campaign. But Hannibal had not come to Italy to fight fair. He had come to teach Rome a new kind of warfare. At the Battle of Trebia in December 218 BC, Hannibal lured a Roman army into an icy river, then ambushed them with forces hidden in the reeds. 30,000 Romans died. At Lake Trasimene in June 217 BC, he trapped an entire Roman army in a narrow defile with the lake on one side and hills on the other. Morning fog concealed his forces until they struck. In 3 hours, 15,000 Romans were killed, including the consul Flaminius. Another 15,000 were captured. Rome had never experienced defeats of this scale. Panic spread through the city. Mothers wept in the streets. The Senate appointed Fabius Maximus as dictator, a man who understood that Rome could not defeat Hannibal in open battle. Fabius adopted a strategy of avoidance: shadow Hannibal's army, cut off his supplies, harass his foragers, but never engage in a pitched battle. It worked. For over a year, Hannibal marched up and down Italy, unable to force a decisive engagement. But the Roman people hated this strategy. They called Fabius the delayer, meant as an insult. Romans did not hide from enemies. Romans did not run. Romans crushed their foes in glorious battle, the way their ancestors had for 500 years. The people demanded action, demanded blood, demanded vengeance for the humiliations at Trebia and Trasimene. In 216 BC, Rome held elections for new consuls. They chose Gaius Terentius Varro and Lucius Aemilius Paulus. Varro was a populist, a man of the people, who promised to restore Roman honor through decisive action. Paulus was an experienced commander, more cautious, who had actually studied Hannibal's tactics. The two men despised each other. Roman tradition gave each consul command of the army on alternate days, a system designed to prevent tyranny, but which created strategic chaos. The Senate gave them a simple order: find Hannibal and destroy him. They were given the largest army Rome had ever fielded, 8 legions, which was unprecedented. Normally, Rome fielded 4 legions maximum. This was double. 80,000 Roman and Italian infantry, 7,200 cavalry, organized into the most massive military formation the Republic had ever created. When Hannibal heard that this enormous army was marching toward him, he did something unexpected. He did not retreat to defensible ground. He did not try to avoid battle. Instead, he deliberately positioned his army near the town of Cannae in Apulia, southeastern Italy. He captured the Roman supply depot there, forcing the Romans to come to him. Then he chose his battlefield with the care of an artist selecting a canvas. The plain near Cannae was wide and flat, perfect for the Roman infantry to deploy in their traditional formation. The Ophidius River protected one flank. Hills protected the other. It looked like exactly the kind of ground where Roman numerical superiority would be decisive, where their disciplined infantry could simply grind through Hannibal's smaller force by sheer weight of numbers. That's exactly what Hannibal wanted them to think. Hannibal's army numbered approximately 50,000 men, but it was unlike any army the ancient world had seen. It was not a national army, but a mercenary force bound together by loyalty to one man and the promise of Roman plunder. His heavy infantry consisted of Libyan spearmen in the center. These were veterans who had fought for years, disciplined and deadly. On their flanks, he placed Iberian and Gallic warriors, fierce tribal fighters who loved close combat but lacked Roman discipline. His cavalry was his masterpiece. On the right wing, he positioned his Iberian and Gallic heavy cavalry under Hasdrubal, his most trusted commander. On the left wing, his Numidian light cavalry, the finest horsemen in the Mediterranean, men who could ride before they could walk, who could shoot arrows at full gallop with terrifying accuracy. But Hannibal's greatest weapon was not his soldiers, it was his mind. He understood something fundamental about warfare that the Romans did not. The Romans believed in overwhelming force applied directly. If you had more men, you won. If you had better equipment, you won. If you fought with more courage, you won. Simple. Hannibal understood that battles were geometry, psychology, and timing. He had studied the Romans for years. He knew how they thought, how they fought, how their pride would lead them into traps. He knew that Roman consuls craved glory above all else. He knew that Roman infantry believed themselves invincible. He knew that Roman cavalry was the weakest part of their army, and he knew that if he could exploit these weaknesses in exactly the right sequence, he could turn Rome's strength into its doom. On the morning of August 2nd, 216 BC, the Roman army moved into position. It was a sight that would have intimidated any commander. 87,000 men arranged in perfect formation, their armor gleaming in the morning sun. The Roman infantry formed the center in a massive block, deeper than usual, on Varro's orders. He believed that sheer mass would break through Hannibal's line by weight alone. The Roman cavalry, about 2,400 men, took the right wing near the river. The Italian allied cavalry, about 4,800 men, took the left. Consul Varro commanded that day. It was his turn. Paulus, the more cautious consul, commanded the right wing, but had to follow Varro's overall strategy. They advanced slowly, inevitably, a machine of bronze and iron rolling forward to crush everything in its path. Hannibal arranged his forces in a formation that puzzled Roman observers. His cavalry took the wings, as expected, but his infantry line was strange. Instead of a straight line or the traditional convex formation that curved toward the enemy, Hannibal arranged his center in a convex arc that curved away from the enemy, bulging forward. He placed his least reliable troops, the Gauls and Iberians, in this forward bulge. His best troops, the Libyan veterans, he positioned on the flanks of the infantry line, slightly behind the main line. To the Romans, it looked like Hannibal was offering them his weakest point, inviting them to strike at his center. It looked like a mistake, an error of judgment by a commander finally facing a force too large to outmaneuver. The Romans should have been suspicious. Hannibal did not make mistakes.
The battle began with cavalry action, as ancient battles typically did. On the Roman right, near the river, where the terrain was narrow, Roman cavalry faced Hasdrubal's Spanish and Gallic heavy cavalry. The Romans were outnumbered here, about 2,400 against 6,500, but they were confident. Roman cavalry were noblemen, aristocrats who had trained since childhood. The clash was immediate and brutal, but within minutes the Roman cavalry began to crumble. Hasdrubal's men fought with desperate ferocity, dismounting to pull Romans from their horses, using tactics the civilized Romans considered barbaric. Consul Paulus himself fought in this cavalry melee, wounded multiple times, but refusing to retreat. The Roman cavalry broke and fled, many drowning in the Aphidus River trying to escape. It was a disaster, but the Romans barely noticed because something seemed to be going right in the center. The Roman infantry crashed into Hannibal's center like a hammer striking an anvil. The Gauls and Iberians, as expected, began to give ground. They fought fiercely, but the sheer weight of Roman numbers was pushing them back. The convex arc began to flatten, then became concave, curving backward. To the Romans, this was exactly what should happen. They were winning. Their superior numbers, their superior discipline, their superior armor, all of it was working exactly as Roman doctrine promised. The legionaries pushed forward, eager to reach Hannibal himself, eager to end this war with their swords red with Carthaginian blood. They compressed their formation even tighter, each man pressing against the one in front, shields overlapping, the entire mass of Roman infantry becoming a single crushing entity driving deep into Hannibal's line. But as the Roman center drove deeper into Hannibal's line, the formation became compressed. The wide Roman front became narrower and narrower as the curve of Hannibal's line created natural walls on either side. Romans in the center could barely move, pressed against each other so tightly that men could not raise their swords. They could only push forward with their shields, suffocating in their own mass. The Roman formation, designed for flexibility and maneuver, had become a mob. And still they pushed forward because they could see Hannibal's center was on the verge of breaking. Just a little more pressure, just a few more minutes, and they would punch through entirely. They never saw the trap closing around them.
On the Roman left wing, the Numidian cavalry had been engaged in a strange, inconclusive fight with the Italian allied cavalry. The Numidians were outnumbered, but they used their superior mobility to avoid decisive contact, circling, feinting, shooting arrows, then retreating before the heavier Italian cavalry could close. It looked like a stalemate. But it was not a stalemate. It was a holding action. The Numidians only needed to keep the Italian cavalry occupied, to prevent them from supporting the Roman infantry or noticing what was happening on the other side of the battlefield. And what was happening on the other side would change warfare forever. Hasdrubal, having completely destroyed the Roman cavalry on the right wing, did something unprecedented in ancient warfare. Instead of pursuing the fleeing enemy or looting the dead, he immediately reorganized his cavalry and led them behind Hannibal's infantry line to the other side of the battlefield. This required incredible discipline. Cavalry that had just won a desperate fight, whose blood was up, whose instinct was to chase down fleeing enemies, were ordered to wheel around and attack again on the opposite flank. They obeyed because Hasdrubal was Hannibal's brother-in-law, and because they trusted Hannibal's plan even when they could not see it. When Hasdrubal's cavalry appeared behind the Italian allied cavalry, the Italians panicked. They were now trapped between Hasdrubal's fresh heavy cavalry and the Numidian light cavalry. They broke and fled. In less than 30 minutes, Hannibal had achieved complete cavalry superiority, driving every Roman and Italian horseman from the field. Now came the moment Hannibal had planned for. His Libyan heavy infantry, the veterans who had been positioned on the flanks, slightly behind the main line, wheeled inward 90 degrees. They turned to face the sides of the Roman formation. The Romans, still pushing forward against the Gauls and Iberians, suddenly found themselves attacked from both sides. This was not supposed to happen. Infantry did not attack infantry from the sides in ancient warfare. They attacked from the front while cavalry handled the flanks. But Hannibal had removed all the cavalry, creating a pure infantry battle. And in that battle, he had turned geometry into a weapon. The Roman formation, designed to push forward, could not respond to attacks from the sides. Men on the edges tried to turn to face the new threat, but they were packed too tightly. Those in the center did not even know they were being flanked.
Then Hasdrubal's cavalry, having driven off all Roman cavalry, returned to the battlefield one final time. They crashed into the rear of the Roman infantry formation. The trap was complete. The Romans were surrounded. Gauls and Iberians pressing from the front, Libya veterans attacking from both sides, cavalry smashing into their rear. This was the double envelopment, a maneuver that military theorists had described, but no one had ever executed perfectly in a major battle. Hannibal had taken 87,000 men and compressed them into a killing box, where their numbers became their doom. The more men Rome had brought, the worse their situation became. They could not maneuver, could not retreat, could not even raise their weapons effectively. They could only die. What followed was not a battle, but a slaughter that lasted for hours. The August sun climbed higher, turning the plain into a furnace. Inside the compressed mass of Roman soldiers, men began to suffocate from heat and lack of air. Contemporary accounts describe Romans dying on their feet, held upright by the pressure of bodies around them. Those on the edges fought desperately, but they were fighting enemies on all sides. There was nowhere to retreat. Those who tried to break out were cut down by cavalry. Those who threw down their weapons and begged for mercy were killed anyway. Hannibal had given orders to take no prisoners until the battle was won. The Romans died with their faces to the enemy, maintaining their discipline even as their world collapsed. They died in their perfect formations, still organized by century and cohort, still responding to the orders of centurions who were themselves dying. Consul Paulus, already wounded from the cavalry battle, fought in the infantry melee until he could no longer stand. When offered a horse to escape, he refused. "I will not leave my men," he said. He died surrounded by his personal guard, all of whom fell fighting around his body. Consul Varro, commanding from a safer position, realized the catastrophe unfolding. He managed to fight his way out with about 70 cavalry and fled to the town of Venusia. He would be mocked for this cowardice for the rest of his life, but his survival meant someone could bring news of the disaster back to Rome. Both tribunes of the plebs died. 29 of 48 military tribunes died. 80 senators who had volunteered to serve in the ranks died. Entire noble families were extinguished in a single afternoon.
As the sun began to set, the killing gradually stopped, not because Hannibal ordered it, but because his men were physically exhausted from slaughter. The battlefield was a vision from hell. Bodies lay stacked 3 and 4 deep across acres of ground. The Alphetus River ran red with blood. This is not metaphor. Ancient sources specifically describe the water becoming undrinkable from the amount of blood flowing into it. Carrion birds circled in clouds so thick they darkened the sky. The screaming of the wounded could be heard from miles. Hannibal's men moved through the field, collecting weapons, armor, and rings from the dead. They filled baskets with gold rings taken from Roman senators and equestrians. When these baskets were later displayed in Carthage, they filled the Senate chamber. The Romans had come with their finest, their wealthiest, their best. All of it now belonged to Hannibal. The numbers are almost incomprehensible. Modern historians, analyzing ancient sources and archaeological evidence, estimate that between 50,000 and 70,000 Romans and Italian allies died at Cannae in a single day, in 6 hours of actual combat. To put this in perspective, this is more than the total American casualties in the entire Revolutionary War. More than died on both sides at Gettysburg. More than the British lost on the first day of the Somme. It was the single bloodiest day of combat in ancient history, possibly in all history until the Industrial Age. Hannibal's losses? Approximately 6,000 men, most of them Gauls who had borne the brunt of the Roman assault. The kill ratio was approximately 10 to 1, 10 Romans for every Carthaginian. It was not a battle, it was an execution. The news reached Rome 3 days later. A rider, exhausted, covered in dust, delivered the message to the Senate. The army is destroyed. Both consuls are dead or fled. Hannibal is victorious. The Senate chamber fell silent. Then, pandemonium. Women ran through the streets screaming. Temples filled with citizens begging the gods for mercy. The Senate declared 20 days of public mourning. But there was no time for mourning because the strategic situation was catastrophic. Rome had lost not just an army, but an entire generation of military leadership. They had no troops to defend the city if Hannibal marched on Rome itself. The Italian allies, who had provided half the army at Cannae, began to waver. If Rome could lose so completely, perhaps Hannibal would win the war. Perhaps it was time to switch sides. Modern military academies, West Point, Sandhurst, and St. Cyr, still teach Cannae as the perfect example of tactical envelopment. Officers learn about the importance of cavalry superiority, the danger of overconfidence, the value of terrain selection, and the psychological dimension of warfare. But they also learned why Cannae, despite being a perfect tactical victory, was ultimately a strategic failure. Hannibal proved that you can win every battle and still lose the war if you lack the strategic depth to exploit tactical victories. This lesson, that tactics without strategy are meaningless, is perhaps more important than the tactical lessons themselves. Rome lost the battle but won the war, because Rome understood that war is ultimately about resources, alliances, logistics, and willpower more than battlefield brilliance. The archaeological evidence of Cannae continues to emerge even today. In the 19th and 20th centuries, farmers plowing fields near the ancient battlefield regularly turned up bronze weapons, iron armor fragments, and human bones. In 2016, archaeologists discovered a mass grave containing hundreds of Roman soldiers, their bones showing evidence of the horrific wounds described in ancient texts: skulls split by swords, ribs crushed by spear thrusts, arm bones showing defensive wounds. Analysis of the bones revealed that many of these men were very young, teenagers, supporting ancient accounts that Rome had conscripted boys to fill the ranks. Some skeletons showed evidence of previous battle wounds that had healed, indicating these were veterans who had survived other battles only to die at Cannae. The bones tell a story that matches the ancient texts with horrifying precision. One of the most haunting details from ancient sources concerns what happened the night after the battle. As darkness fell, the wounded lay scattered across miles of battlefield. The Carthaginians, exhausted from fighting, made camp and posted guards, but did little to help the wounded. Ancient sources describe how the Romans wounded tried to crawl toward each other in the darkness, seeking companionship in their final hours. Some begged Carthaginian soldiers to kill them quickly rather than let them die slowly. Others, driven mad by pain and thirst, tried to drink their own blood or the blood of the dead around them. At dawn, Hannibal's men systematically moved through the battlefield, killing any Romans who still lived. It took 3 days to loot and clear the battlefield. The bodies were left to rot where they fell. There were simply too many to bury.
The aftermath of the Second Punic War was brutal for Carthage. Rome imposed crushing war reparations, stripped Carthage of its navy and overseas territories, and forbade it from waging war without Roman permission. Hannibal, attempting to rebuild Carthage as a peaceful commercial power, was eventually forced into exile when Rome demanded his extradition. He fled to the eastern Mediterranean, serving various kings as a military advisor. For 20 years he wandered, always one step ahead of Roman assassins, always plotting one more campaign against his eternal enemy. In 183 BC, surrounded by Roman soldiers in Bithynia, knowing escape was impossible, Hannibal took poison. His last words were allegedly, "Let us relieve the Romans of their anxiety, since they think it too long to wait for an old man's death." He was 64 years old and had spent his entire life at war with Rome. But the ghost of Cannae haunted Rome for centuries. Roman mothers would quiet crying children by whispering, "Hannibal is at the gates, Hannibal at Portas." For generations, Romans would swear oaths by the day of Cannae. The word Cannae became synonymous with catastrophic military defeat. During the Roman civil wars, politicians would accuse their enemies of planning another Cannae. When Crassus lost his army to the Parthians at Carrhae in 53 BC, it was immediately compared to Cannae. When Varus lost 3 legions in the Teutoburg forest in 9 AD, Augustus supposedly beat his head against the walls shouting, "Varus, give me back my legions!" And everyone knew he was thinking of Cannae. The battle became embedded in Roman cultural DNA as the ultimate example of how pride and overconfidence could destroy an empire. The military legacy of Cannae is even more profound. Hannibal's double envelopment became the gold standard of tactical excellence that every military commander has studied for 2,200 years. During the American Civil War, both Union and Confederate generals studied Cannae, trying to replicate its perfection. The German general staff in World War I analyzed it extensively. The Schlieffen Plan, Germany's strategy for World War I, was essentially an attempt to execute a Cannae-style envelopment on a continental scale.
It failed because modern railways and telegraphs made such maneuvers impossible. In World War II, German blitzkrieg tactics achieved several mini-cannaes, particularly the encirclement of Allied forces at Dunkirk and the initial encirclements of Soviet armies in Operation Barbarossa. The Battle of Tannenberg in 1914 is sometimes called the modern Cannae.
But Rome also learned from Cannae. They never again allowed Hannibal to fight them on his terms. They returned to Fabian tactics, shadow his army, cut his supplies, avoid pitched battles. They opened new fronts in Spain and Africa, forcing Hannibal to fight a multi-front war without reinforcements. Most importantly, they found a general who had studied Hannibal's tactics and could match his brilliance. His name was Publius Cornelius Scipio, later called Scipio Africanus. He had survived Cannae as a young tribune. He had watched Hannibal's double envelopment destroy his army, and he had learned. 15 years after Cannae, Scipio would use Hannibal's own tactics against him at the Battle of Zama in Africa, finally defeating the man who had haunted Rome's nightmares. But that victory came at a cost. Rome never forgot the lesson of Cannae. Never again would they underestimate an enemy. Never again would they rely on numerical superiority alone. The trauma of that August day fundamentally changed how Rome fought wars. For Hannibal, Cannae was simultaneously his greatest triumph and the beginning of his doom. He had proven himself perhaps the greatest tactical commander in military history. He had taken an army of mercenaries and forged it into a weapon that could destroy the most powerful military machine of the ancient world. But tactics cannot win wars without strategy, and Hannibal's strategy depended on Italian cities defecting from Rome. He expected that after Cannae, Rome's Italian Confederation would collapse. He was wrong. The Romans had spent centuries building loyalty through a system of shared citizenship and fair treatment. Most Italian cities, even after Cannae, chose to remain loyal to Rome. Without a strategic base in Italy, without siege equipment, without reinforcements from Carthage, Hannibal could win every battle and still lose the war. For the next 13 years, Hannibal remained in Italy, marching up and down the peninsula, winning battles but unable to strike the killing blow against Rome itself. His army gradually weakened through attrition. His Italian allies were reconquered one by new Roman armies. His brother Hasdrubal tried to bring reinforcements from Spain, but was intercepted and killed at the Battle of Metaurus in 207 BC. When Hannibal learned of his brother's death, they threw Hasdrubal's severed head into his camp. He allegedly said, "I see there the fate of Carthage." In 203 BC, with Scipio's army threatening Carthage itself, Hannibal was recalled to Africa after 15 years in Italy. He left the country he had devastated but never conquered. The Second Punic War ended at Zama in 202 BC, where Scipio used Hannibal's own double envelopment tactics to defeat him.
Several major Italian cities immediately defected to Hannibal. Capua, the second largest city in Italy, opened its gates to him. Much of southern Italy switched allegiance. King Philip V of Macedon, seeing Rome's weakness, allied with Hannibal and declared war on Rome. Syracuse and Sicily rebelled against Roman control. For the first time in its history, the Roman Republic faced the real possibility of annihilation. And yet, Hannibal did not march on Rome. This decision has puzzled historians for 2,000 years. His cavalry commander, Maharbal, allegedly said to him, "You know how to win a battle, Hannibal, but you do not know how to use your victory. If you march on Rome now, in 5 days you will dine in the capital." Hannibal replied, "I need time to consider." Maharbal supposedly muttered, "The gods have not given all their gifts to one man. You can conquer, but you cannot exploit conquest." Why didn't Hannibal march on Rome immediately after Cannae? Military historians have debated this for millennia. The most likely explanation is logistical. Hannibal had no siege equipment. He had left it all in Spain when he crossed the Alps. Rome's walls, built after the Gallic sack of 390 BC, were massive and had never been breached. Hannibal's army, while victorious, was exhausted and had taken casualties. His supply lines stretched back to Spain and Carthage, both distant.
Most critically, Carthage itself was not sending reinforcements. The Carthaginian Senate, dominated by a peace party that had never fully supported Hannibal, refused to send the supplies and fresh troops that would have allowed him to finish what he had started. Hannibal was like a boxer who had knocked down his opponent but did not have the strength left for the knockout blow. Rome, facing extinction, did something that only Rome could do. They refused to surrender. They refused to negotiate. They refused to acknowledge defeat. When Hannibal sent ambassadors offering peace terms, the Senate refused to even receive them. When he offered to ransom the Roman prisoners taken at Cannae, the Senate refused, effectively condemning their own citizens to slavery or death. The message was clear: Rome would rather die than admit defeat. And then Rome did something even more remarkable. They rebuilt their army. They conscripted everyone. Boys as young as 17, slaves promised freedom if they fought, criminals offered pardons. They armed them with weapons stripped from temples and museums. Within months, they had assembled 2 new legions. They would eventually field 25 legions, a military mobilization that mobilized nearly 25% of the entire Roman male population.
One of the most debated questions about Cannae concerns the role of the Italian allies. Half of the Roman army at Cannae consisted of Italian allied troops, Latins, Samnites, Umbrians, and others. They fought and died alongside the Romans, and their casualties were proportionally just as severe. Yet after the battle, several Italian cities defected to Hannibal. This has led some historians to question whether the Italian allies fought as hard as the Romans, whether some deliberately underperformed, or whether they were simply placed in impossible positions. The evidence suggests they fought bravely. Their cavalry held against the Numidians longer than expected, and Italian infantry died in the same proportions as Romans. What changed after Cannae was not their battlefield performance, but their political calculation. If Rome could be defeated so completely, perhaps backing Hannibal was the safer bet. The broader historical context makes Cannae even more remarkable. This was not a battle between primitive tribes, but between 2 of the most sophisticated civilizations of the ancient world. Rome had a professional army, advanced logistics, standardized equipment, and a military tradition stretching back 5 centuries. Carthage was a commercial empire that controlled the Mediterranean trade, had the ancient world's most advanced navy, and could draw on resources from Spain to Africa to Sicily. These were superpowers of their age. And at Cannae, one superpower's army was annihilated by a smaller force through pure tactical superiority. It would be as if a modern nation with half the population and a third the GDP defeated a superpower's entire military in a single engagement. The scale of the upset is almost incomprehensible. The economic impact of Cannae on both Rome and Carthage was staggering. Rome lost not just soldiers, but an entire generation of its wealthiest citizens. The men who could afford equestrian or senatorial rank, who wore the gold rings that Hannibal collected by the basketful. The Roman economy contracted severely. Tax revenues collapsed, public works stopped. The city went into a mourning that lasted for years. But Rome's confederate system meant it could draw on resources from across Italy. As devastating as the losses were, Rome could recover because it had strategic depth. Carthage, conversely, failed to capitalize economically on the victory. The Carthaginian Senate, dominated by a merchant class that feared military power, refused to send the resources needed to exploit Hannibal's success. They saw the war as expensive and risky, not as an opportunity. This strategic myopia meant that Cannae, despite being a perfect tactical victory, became strategically meaningless.
The psychological impact on survivors was devastating. Ancient sources described Roman soldiers who escaped Cannae suffering what we would now recognize as post-traumatic stress disorder. Some could never speak of the battle without breaking down. Others had recurring nightmares for years. The Senate actually had to pass laws prohibiting these survivors from wearing their military decorations in public because seeing them triggered panic in the civilian population. These men had witnessed something that broke them fundamentally: the complete inversion of everything they believed about Roman military superiority. They had seen their invincible legions turned into helpless victims. They had watched their finest commanders die in the mud. They had experienced what it meant to be utterly
completely defeated by a superior mind. Hannibal's genius at Cannae lay not in any single innovation, but in the perfect synthesis of multiple tactical elements executed with flawless timing. He understood that ancient battles had phases: cavalry, infantry, pursuit, and he orchestrated these phases like a composer conducting a symphony. He knew exactly when to order his center to retreat, exactly when to wheel his Libyan flanks inward, exactly when to send his cavalry into the Roman rear. Ancient sources say he commanded from the center of his line, personally fighting in the most dangerous position, able to see the entire battlefield and adjust in real time. This was leadership of the highest order. Tactical brilliance combined with personal courage, strategic vision combined with the common touch that inspired mercenaries to fight like fanatics for a foreign general in a foreign land. The Romans, for their part, were not incompetent at Cannae. They followed their traditional doctrine, which had worked for centuries. They had numerical superiority, good equipment, excellent discipline, and brave soldiers. What they lacked was adaptability. Roman military doctrine was conservative, proven, reliable, and inflexible. When Hannibal presented them with a situation outside their experience, they could not adapt quickly enough. This inflexibility was both Rome's greatest strength and its critical weakness. It gave them consistency and discipline, but it made them vulnerable to innovative tactics. After Cannae, Rome would become more flexible, more willing to adopt enemy tactics that worked, more open to unconventional strategies. The Roman army that eventually defeated Carthage was fundamentally different from the one that died at Cannae, transformed by the trauma of that defeat.
There's a profound irony in how Cannae is remembered today. In the ancient world and through most of history, it was remembered as Rome's greatest humiliation, the day the invincible republic was brought to its knees. But in modern military education, it's remembered as the pinnacle of tactical excellence, studied not for Rome's failure, but for Hannibal's genius. This shift in perspective reflects a broader change in how we think about military history. Ancient historians focused on moral lessons, courage, perseverance, divine favor. Modern historians focus on tactical and strategic analysis. Both perspectives are valid, but they lead to very different conclusions about what Cannae means. Was it a cautionary tale about pride and overconfidence, or a masterclass in tactical warfare? Perhaps it was both, a reminder that even perfect tactics cannot overcome strategic weaknesses, but also that tactical brilliance can achieve the seemingly impossible. The human cost of Cannae extended far beyond the battlefield. In Rome, every family lost someone: a father, son, brother, uncle. The wailing of mourning women echoed through the city for weeks, but the Senate, in a display of iron will, forbade public displays of grief after the initial mourning period. Life had to continue. The city had to function. Fear and despair were luxuries Rome could not afford. Women were ordered to stay indoors so their tears would not demoralize the population. Religious ceremonies continued as if nothing had happened. Markets reopened. The Senate met daily, projecting an image of normalcy and strength, even as they faced possible extinction. This psychological resilience, the ability to suffer catastrophic losses and continue functioning, was perhaps Rome's greatest strength. Hannibal could destroy Rome's armies, but he could not break Rome's spirit. One of the most fascinating aspects of Cannae is how both sides knew something unprecedented was happening even as it unfolded. Ancient sources describe how the Romans, as the trap closed around them, realized they were experiencing something that had never happened before. Officers shouted contradictory orders. Some urged continuing the forward push, believing they were on the verge of breakthrough. Others screamed to pull back and reform. Still others ordered the flanks to wheel outward to face the Libyan attack. But in the compressed chaos of the formation, none of these orders could be effectively executed. The Roman military machine, which depended on discipline and communication, lost both simultaneously. Centurions couldn't reach their men, tribunes couldn't see the overall situation, the consuls had lost control. The army was no longer an army,
but a mob of individuals fighting and dying without coordination. For Hannibal's men, there must have been a moment of profound realization. They were actually doing it. This impossible plan, this insane gamble was working. The Romans, who had seemed invincible, who outnumbered them nearly 2-to-1, were trapped and helpless. Ancient sources suggest that some of Hannibal's soldiers initially hesitated when ordered to attack from the flanks and rear. So conditioned were they to frontal warfare that flank attacks on infantry seemed wrong, unnatural. But as they saw the Romans unable to respond, unable to defend themselves, the Carthaginian army must have felt a savage joy mixed with disbelief. They were making history. They were participating in something that would be remembered for thousands of years. And they were getting revenge for every defeat Carthage had suffered, every humiliation Rome had inflicted on their people. The aftermath of Cannae changed not just Roman military doctrine, but Roman society itself. The war required total mobilization. Slaves were freed to fight, thousands of them. This created a new social class of freedmen who had earned citizenship through military service. Women took over businesses and managed estates while men were at war, changing gender roles in ways that persisted after the war ended. The traditional Roman prohibition against standing armies began to weaken as Rome realized it needed professional soldiers, not just citizen militias. The Senate expanded to replace dead members, bringing in new blood from families that had never held power. In these ways, Cannae accelerated social changes that might otherwise have taken generations. Catastrophe became a catalyst for transformation.
The religious response to Cannae reveals how Romans understood catastrophe. They did not blame military incompetence or tactical errors. They blamed the gods. Clearly, Rome had offended the divine powers through some religious error or moral failing. The Senate consulted the Sibylline books, ancient prophecies kept in a temple. Based on these consultations, they performed human sacrifice for the first time in Roman history, burying alive 2 Gauls and 2 Greeks in the Forum Boarium to appease the gods. They sent embassies to Delphi to consult Apollo's oracle. They instituted new religious festivals and restored old ones that had been neglected. This response seems irrational to modern minds, but it served a crucial psychological function. It gave Romans a sense of control. If the disaster was caused by religious error, then correct religious observance could prevent future disasters. It turned random catastrophe into explicable event. Perhaps the most lasting legacy of Cannae is how it shaped the Roman concept of virtus, manly virtue, courage in the face of impossible odds. The Romans who died at Cannae became heroes precisely because they lost. They had maintained discipline even in defeat. They had refused to surrender. They had died with their faces to the enemy. This created a cultural ideal that influenced Roman behavior for centuries. Better to die honorably than live in shame. Better to fight impossible odds than surrender to certainty. This mindset would drive Roman expansion, Roman stubbornness in later wars, even Roman behavior during the empire's final collapse. The ghost of Cannae whispered to every generation of Romans, never surrender, never admit defeat. Fight until the gods themselves tear the sword from your hand. It was both Rome's greatest strength and eventually part of its tragedy. Today, the town of Cannae della Battaglia sits near the ancient battlefield. It's a small, quiet place where tourists rarely visit. A modest archaeological park marks the approximate location of the battle. Local guides will show you the terrain, explain where the armies formed up, trace the path of the envelopment. But it's hard to imagine standing in those peaceful fields what happened there 2,237 years ago. Hard to imagine the screaming, the blood, the suffocating press of bodies, the terror of men trapped without hope. The earth has absorbed it all, grown crops over the bones, erased the physical evidence of humanity's capacity for organized violence. But the memory persists in books,
in military academies, in the collective consciousness of Western civilization. Cannae remains the gold standard against which all military disasters are measured, the name that instantly conveys catastrophic, total, annihilating defeat.
In the end, the Battle of Cannae teaches us contradictory lessons, which is perhaps why it remains endlessly fascinating. It teaches that genius can overcome numbers, that tactics matter more than strength, that preparation and understanding your enemy are worth more than courage alone. But it also teaches that tactical victories mean nothing without strategic vision, that winning battles doesn't win wars, that even perfect execution cannot compensate for fundamental strategic weaknesses. Hannibal was the better general. Rome was the better state. Hannibal won the battle through brilliance. Rome won the war through persistence, resources, and an institutional structure that could survive catastrophic losses. Both lessons are true. Both lessons are important. And both lessons are written in the blood of 70,000 men who died in 6 hours on a hot August day when the ancient world held its breath and military history changed forever.